Opening the diagonal for the queen and king's bishop immediately challenges central control. Instantly contesting the center, this mirrors white's ambition for central influence. Developing the knight to attack the central pawn immediately contests central space and prepares castling. This solidifies the pawn's defense while preparing to contest the center and develop another piece. Unleashing a bind, this bishop immediately pressures the knight, influencing a vast diagonal and setting the stage for complex tactical dances. Forcing the bishop to decide its fate now, potentially gaining space or creating a slight structural weakness later. Retreating the bishop preserves it, keeping open lines for central pawn advances and potential queenside pressure later. Unleashing pressure on the center, black's knight immediately challenges white's pawn, preparing to castling while ignoring the pin. Securing the monarch allows for future pawn advances and central control with greater peace of mind. Bravely challenging white's bishop, black gains valuable queenside space, though it slightly weakens the pawn's structure. Reshaping the bishop's influence, this retreat clears the path for pawn advances while maintaining pressure on the queenside. Developing the bishop to this diagonal solidifies black's kingside pawn structure and eyes the central squares for future action. Reinforcing the central pawn and preparing to develop the queenside minor piece opens lines for a potential kingside attack. Developing the bishop here eyes the kingside and pressures white's center. Reinforcing the central pawn and preparing d4, white solidifies their queenside pawn structure while keeping options open. Solidifying the center and preparing for a potential nb8d7 maneuver. Challenging the central pawn structure opens lines and forces black into immediate tactical considerations. Retreating the bishop clears the diagonal for queen development and supports the e5 pawn's defense. Challenging black's bishop and aiming to disrupt their pawn structure opens up diagonal lines for attack. Challenging the bishop's secure post, black subtly prepares for a central pawn push and potentially opens a diagonal for their own pieces. Preserving the attacking bishop safeguards queenside pressure and forestalls immediate tactical skirmishes. Gaining tempo by developing the queen indirectly prepares for central engagement and reinforces queenside pawn structure. Challenging black's queenside pawn structure, this thrust aims to seize the initiative and prevent kingside castling. The castling kingside brings the monarch closer to the storm brewing on the queenside open files. Opening the A file immediately demands attention, potentially exposing black's castled king to increased pressure. Opening the file for your rook creates immediate counterplay against white's queenside pawn structure. Sacrificing the bishop here releases central tension and opens lines, potentially accelerating development or exposing the black king's defenses. Opening the g-file drastically compromises the king's shelter, inviting immediate tactical threats down the newly exposed diagonal. Targeting the open g-file with the bishop now aims to exploit black's weakened kingside pawn structure. Boldly opening the kingside files, this pawn push disrupts white's control and promises a dynamic counterplay, though it weakens the king's pawn shield. Unleashing the queen here aims to exploit the weakened kingside pawn structure that black created. Opening the f-file creates immediate counterplay, though it does expose your king's structure. Securing the pawn opens a powerful central diagonal for the queen, now eyeing aggressive possibilities. Sacrificing the pawn opens a critical diagonal for your queen, but beware of the exposed kingside. Targeting the pinned knight creates tactical chaos. White seeks to exploit the weakened kingside. Developing the knight to b8, a surprising retreat, aims to reroute it to d7, potentially bolstering the kingside defense or preparing a timely f5 thrust. This capture unravels black's pawn structure, creating an inviting target on the now open king's file. Relocating the king to avoid the bishop exchange significantly alters the pawn structure, creating weaknesses around the new monarch's safety. Unlocking the d-file, this rook's relocation immediately creates immediate pressure on the weakened black king. Sacrificing the queen opens up critical lines for your king, demanding immediate and sharp counterplay. Recapturing the knight eliminates black's active queen, simplifying into a materially equal but structurally unbalanced endgame. The rook's sortie onto the open file immediately pressures white's isolated pawn, aiming to disrupt its defensive structure. Recapturing the knight opens lines, creating new attacking prospects along the d-file. Trading queens simplifies the board, bringing the endgame closer and challenges the knight's activity. Knight centralization now exploits the weakened kingside pawn structure, creating immediate attacking potential. Steering the monarch towards the queenside offers a much-needed active post, aiming to leverage the open c-file. A proactive attempt to activate the queenside knights and create pressure on the weakened c-pawns. Re-establishing central presence and preparing for potential pawn advances on the kingside feels like a solid plan. Repositioning the knight to support an eventual push through the center. Reactivating the knight to support the d-pawn and prepare for a queenside advance offers excellent counterplay. Stepping up the pressure on the queenside pawn is a fine positional idea, forcing black to defend a weakness. Activating the bishop here aims to disrupt white's knight outpost and potentially open diagonals. Solidifying the king's central presence aims to reroute the knight and prepare for queenside expansion. A bold pawn thrust seeking to disrupt white's central control and open lines for black's pieces. Initiating a maneuver to reroute the knight, aiming to establish a more active presence on the kingside and challenge black's doubled pawns. This repositioning of the rook aims to activate it along the now open b-file, seeking counterplay against white's queenside pawn structure. Unleashing the queenside pawn storm, white aims to gain space and potentially trap black's pieces on the edge of the board. Reinforcing the central pawn structure aims to prevent white's knight from easily infiltrating after the queens are gone. Unlocking the d-file provides crucial infiltration potential against black's weakened kingside. This revitalizing bishop repositioning aims to free the d7 knight and potentially contest the d-file, preparing for active counterplay. Securing the open d-file now forces black to commit their knight, potentially leading to valuable pawn weaknesses. The knight repositions, eyeing the central squares and preparing to contest the d-file. Concentrate the rooks to assault the enemy king, but watch out for the pawn on b4. Unleashing the knight toward the queenside opens a new axis for pressure. Reactivating the knight towards the kingside promises more active participation in the upcoming skirmishes. The monarch ventures into the fray, seeking activation despite the exposed kingside. Piling on the f-file pressure, the rook now aims to exploit the exposed black king's sanctuary. A precarious king dance begins, exposing a vulnerability that needs immediate attention, lest it become the focal point of white's assault. Preparing to seize the open c-file for an assault on black's weakened king position. Capturing that knight frees black's bishop, allowing it to pivot and support the upcoming pawn push. Capturing the bishop now unleashes a dangerous knight onto a key central square, potentially dominating the board and disrupting black's coordination. A daring repositioning of the rook to activate it on a new line, seeking counterplay. Initiating a kingside pawn storm to disrupt black's central pawn structure. Opening the c-file now challenges white's rook and aims to disrupt their coordination. The knight's check pries open the kingside, forcing the black king into a more exposed position. Protecting the king from the advancing knight and preparing for the inevitable pawn push forward. Activating the rook to the fourth rank creates immediate attacking pressure and eye on the vulnerable black king. Unlocking the center opens lines for your rooks, creating dynamic counterplay. The monarch finds itself under immediate pressure, forcing a swift reaction to escape the incoming checker. Reclaiming the open file, the rook now eyes potential infiltration routes towards white's weakened queenside.